Well, let's make a game about
Donkey!
I didn't exactly know how the game will look or even what the exact genre I want it to be, but one thing I know for certain, we need Shrek in it. I found Shrek model on Sketchfab and imported it directly into Unreal Engine. To bring it to life, I need some animations, so I opened Mixamo and got a bunch of very useful animations. Time to make a playable Shrek character. I mean, it was worth a try, but from now on, I gotta use the free locomotion plugin. The only problem is, the Shrek model I got from Sketchfab has a really f***ed up skeleton, and to make it work with anything Unreal Engine related, I have to go back to Blender and rig it to Unreal's skeleton. But it was 100% worth it, since now I can grab any animation that's supposed to work with Unreal's mannequin and slap it onto my Shrek character. And it will work just fine. The character looks good now, but how can Shrek exist without the swamp? What I always wanted to do is to recreate this scene in Unreal Engine. All I need is vertex painting, a lot, and I mean it, a lot of mega scans, and too much free time I have no idea how to spend. Oh hey, it's been a week, but the swamp looks great. While making the swamp, I did implement a bunch of small details, like these footsteps with sparkles, or stuff like water splashes. At this point, I'm still not sure what game do I even wanna make. I mean, I have Shrek and a beautiful swamp, but what is the gameplay should look like? I was always in love with action RPG type of games, and why not just make one? Won't it be fun if you can become Shrek and slay some monsters and get some loot? And the idea was born. Fairy tale creatures invade the swamp, and you should protect it. You will collect epic loot along the way to become stronger and stronger to progress through the endless waves of enemies attacking your swamp. So we need a bunch of skills, monsters to slay, and epic loot to collect. I decided I want to start from monsters and grab this gingerbread man model from Sketchfab. I went through the same steps as for the Shrek character. Got a model, grabbed some animations from Mixamo, adjust the skeleton and animations in Blender, and imported it all into Unreal Engine to create a Gingy character. I then proceeded to make a simple AI so it will follow you and attack once in a range. We wanna protect ourselves, don't we? So I went on and implemented Souls-like target system. We can press a button to select the closest target and enter combat stance. The camera will behave similar to Souls-like games and will be fixed on the selected target. And before we continue, I want to show you something I've been working on in a backup copy of the project. I completely remade lighting, shadows, and ambience of the whole scene. I don't have enough experience with real 3D environments, but luckily enough, I met a guy whose name is George, and he helped me a lot with the tips on how to improve the visuals of my scene. I think you can just see how much the swamp has improved, so I want to express my gratitude for all the tips to George. After I finished visual changes in the backup project, I merged it all with the main project, so we can continue with our combat system. I polished the combat system a bit, adding target switching, mark above the current target, and health bar on the top of the screen. I implemented melee combat and animations for it, and set up collisions for damage system. I can check for collisions in appropriate moment and deal damage to every enemy colliding with invisible spheres on Shrek's hands. For now, I made enemies just ragdolling after death. I also did the damage numbers popping up on the screen. I'm not completely sold on this, so it's a subject to change. To have something to start with, I implemented a simple wave system, mostly for the convenience of testing. This is a temporary system I will definitely rework later. A horde of gingerbread men is nice, but we need a bit more diversity. It's 2023 after all. So I went back to Sketchfab, found a perfect villain, and went through the same steps of creating and animating the character all over again. This time though, Mixama completely took care of rigging. What we have at the end is a perfect character ready to pop off. I'm sorry. The Puss will run at you and sometimes cast his own ability, Tornado, damaging everything on its path. To spice things up, I added another fairy tale creature, Pinocchio. I decided to make him range, since we already have 2 melee enemies. He will pick up stones from the ground and throw them at you. I really wanted to add a big bad wolf as well, but the best model I found was the one from Shrek's Super Slam game, and it was pretty outdated, so no luck there. But hey, we at least have 3 types of enemies now. The next step in a big picture is to implement ability system. I created a bunch of UI elements in Procreate and Photoshop and put them all together with Unreal Motion Graphics Designer. I obviously took inspiration from real action RPGs. The result is pretty decent in my opinion. I then designed and implemented 6 different abilities for the game. First one is a tornado or cyclone. You become a devastating tornado, crushing everything on your path and dealing damage to surrounding enemies. It's a channeling ability and you need enough mana to sustain it. That's such a classic ability from Diablo games that I just had to implement it. The second ability is Ground Slam. You leap forward, damaging and knocking off all enemies upon landing. It's a perfect ability to use to engage and disengage from combat. I'm a big fan of Leap Slam from Path of Exile, so that's where it comes from. Honestly, I can do it all day long. Your third ability is Dance. You burst into a dance, dealing low but increasing with each tick damage to all enemies in an area. The plot twist is that you firstly completely stationary and secondly have to sustain mana to channel it. The next ability is an Earthquake. Slap the ground to call a wave of spikes in front of you, each dealing some damage in an area around them, meaning they can overlap, causing giant amount of damage if you position correctly. Your next ability is an Earth Bolt. You can't directly use it, but while in a slot, it causes your combat stance become a magic stance. Each auto attack, your left click, will instead fire an Earth Bolt, dealing damage and knocking off the first enemy on the way, or even multiple enemies, if they are close enough. And finally, I made a special potion ability. Drink a potion to restore some percentage of your health. You have limited potion uses, which will reset between waves of enemies. After creating all these abilities, I had some real fun with fixing a lot of bugs. A lot. I also started thinking about what a finished project should look like, and here's my thoughts. Even though I designed 6 abilities, every one of them is a complete tool to deal with monsters. To give you some examples, you can only use Tornado and succeed. You can only use Earthquake and be just fine. You can even go all in and just use your auto attack. So you don't actually need all abilities I designed, only 1 or maximum 2 of them. I would even argue using all abilities will slow you down and create non-optimized gameplay, which kinda brings us to the next topic: loot. You see, in action RPGs, loot usually comes in the form of equipment or gear for your character, sometimes in the form of gold or some other currency. But I don't have any plans to make a whole gear your character system. It's on another level of complexity and I just wanna finish my small project. But I already do have a skill system in place, so what if instead of gear, monsters will drop abilities and various passives which enhance your character? Let me explain. The character starts with no skills, only with auto attack. and should fight some monsters to drop various skills. I will divide loot into categories: abilities, one of the 6 I created, and passives. You can't use passives directly, but they will give your character some stats. For example, there might be a passive skill that gives you 10% attack speed and 20% physical damage, a perfect passive to use with your tornado ability. With that said, I proceeded to create skill shards, physical representations of skills in the world you can interact with and collect. Basically, all loot in the game comes in the form of skill shards. When you collect a shard, it can give you one of the 6 abilities we discussed previously, or a passive skill. I created a special interface window where you can see all the various skills you have collected. You can then choose which passives and abilities you want to use by putting them onto your skill bar, which basically creates your gameplay style. For example, you can choose to use a tornado ability and 5 passive skills which enhance my only active ability. Look, now I can sustain the mana cost and don't worry about my mana anymore. This system adds a whole build-making layer to the game, which I find really cool. Every shard has a name in the world, but they're just cosmetic. I found a giant adjective base on the internet and parsed it inside Unreal Engine. I didn't clean it up, so it can generate names like made-up shard or hilarious shard, which is pretty hilarious. To move on with loot, I firstly added a special stat window for a player to see current life, mana, attack speed, area of effect, damage reduction, health and mana regeneration, and different damage modifiers, like physical damage, earth damage, attack, and spell damage. A passive can grant you up to 4 random stat bonuses. To create a sense of progress, loot should be better and better the more player progress through the game. I made a quite complicated loot generation algorithm, which I'm not sure you really want to hear about, but I can say that it's basically just a set of functions, from a set of world tiers to a set of affix tiers. To be completely honest, at the moment of recording this, which is like 2 months after making a loot generation algorithm, I can't even tell how exactly does it work, but it does. Here is the loot from wave 1, wave 5, wave 10 and wave 15. As you can see in later waves, passives usually have more stat bonuses, and these bonuses are way more significant. I also dynamically changed the icon of a passive to reflect its relative power. Here is a cool thing about stats in my project. I spent some time to make them really matter. Some stats like life or mana are straightforward, but stats like attack speed, area of effect, and different damage modifiers directly impact all active abilities. For example, here is the tornado with no additional attack speed, and this is a tornado with 200% attack speed. You can see it damages enemies way more frequently, as well as drains your mana. Here is a better example: ground slam with no modifiers, and ground slam with 200% attack speed. This is an earthquake ability, pretty impactful. Let's set our area of effect bonus to 200. Way more impactful, right? Tornado with some AoE looks juicy as well. After all that, I went back and reworked the wave system. Firstly, I renamed waves to days, and now they are not endless. You have 21 days of different fairy tale creatures invading your swamp. If you made it through all 21 days, you completed the game. But each day enemies get more health and more damage, as well as new types of enemies appear. So I made sure it's very difficult to survive through all days. I implemented day switching menu. After surviving a day, you can choose to repeat current day, go back to previous one, or continue your progress in the next day, which completes the game loop. You fight enemies, get loot, improve your character with the loot you get, choose your passives and abilities, and if you are strong enough, go to the next day. If you don't feel like you're strong, you can farm some passives in the current day or even go back to the previous one. I also made a bunch of small changes and bug fixes, like combat polishing, adding a custom cursor, death and day reset, abilities tooltips, and the very first message you see when you start the game. Finally, I added some background noise, music, and some Shrek voice lines.
You hit like a pixie!
I found them on YouTube, straight from the Shrek 2 game.
Get on an ogre's bad side!
Shrek will occasionally throw a phrase or two.
Oh, my head hurts.
I added sounds for almost everything, most notably abilities. I'm not a sound designer by any means, so they all came from my library of marketplace assets. The very last thing I want to show you is this cute sign, and now I want you to follow me on my very first playthrough. When you start the game and try to interact with Shrek's house, you notice some weird noise behind you. Since I have nothing but my fists, it may take some time.
See? Now you've gone and made me angry!
We got some loot and I can go check it out. I moved skill window to the iconic outhouse. Seems like I got an attack damage passive, which will help, since it increases damage with fists as well. Even though I didn't get any active abilities, I feel confident enough to jump into the next day. That passive boosted my damage quite a bit.
Guess you need to learn the hard way! Alright, that's enough!
I actually got slapped on the Thursday,
Next time, I'll sit on you!
so I got back to the day 2 and farmed it a bit, to get better passives and maybe some active abilities.
You hit like a pixie! I'm bigger than you!
I looted a potion ability and a nerf bolt one. But after I started the third day, I found myself running around and waiting for my mana to regenerate. It wasn't hard at all, it was just tedious, so I got bored and quit. I did my second, third and fourth playthrough, trying different skills with different passives. I found some overperforming skills, some underperforming ones, and some game-breaking bugs as well. I went back and did some balancing, changing almost every skill in some way, changing enemies and loot scaling, and fixing a bunch of bugs. My first real playthrough felt way much better. There were no incredibly busted abilities, enemies felt challenging enough, and it was a lot of fun to try different builds. Passive management was still quite tedious, if you have a lot of them. But the game is in a much better state overall. Of course, it will be even better with more improvements and balance changes. But hey, I gotta finish somewhere. At the end of the day, it's supposed to be a fun prototype for a YouTube video about Shrek, because we all love Shrek. By no means this is a finished game, but I will still upload this project on my itch.io page if you want to explore and try it out. It is probably a very heavy project since I used a lot of mega scans and high quality textures, so if there is no link in the description, it is probably still uploading or I am already in jail for an IP breach. Still, if you enjoyed the video, I will really appreciate your like and comment, but anyway, see you next time.